5. Implications for psychology. The belief that mind and body are two alien substances had a deadly effect on the psychology of man. It led to the belief that man is a quote-unquote prisoner of the body and therefore either must war against it or seek escape from it if his mind is to be free. The true philosopher ought not to care about the pleasures of eating and drinking. In Plato's Phaedo, we read that, quote, "Thought is best when the mind is gathered into herself, and none of these things trouble her, neither sounds nor sights nor pain nor any pleasure, when she takes leave of the body and has as little as possible to do with it, when she has no bodily sense or desire, but is aspiring after true being." End quote. Socrates held that the purest knowledge comes when the imperfection of the senses is set aside and mind alone operates. Quote, "It has been proved to us by experience that if we would have pure knowledge of anything, we must be quit of the body." End quote. Moreover, Socrates said, quote, "And were we not saying long ago that the soul, when using the body as an instrument of perception, that is to say, when using the sense of sight or hearing or some other sense, for the meaning of perceiving through the body is perceiving through the senses, were we not saying that the soul too is then dragged by the body into the region of the changeable and wanders and is confused? The world spins round her, and she is like a drunkard when she touches change." End quote. Such a view of man's nature led to the extensive pagan ascetic practices of the Greco-Roman world. The pagan ascetic withdrew from the world and the environment of the senses. He courted fatigue and deprived himself of sleep in order to weaken the flesh and free the mind. Fasting was practiced for the same reason. Perfection came through asceticism. These ideas infected the early church, and the practices of the Christian ascetics were adaptations and continuations of pagan ascetics. Moreover, their quote-unquote vision, according to Violet McDermott, in The Cult of the Seer in the Ancient Middle East, were quote-unquote Christianized versions of traditions common to pre-Christian asceticism. The schizophrenic psychology of Greek philosophy could and did lead to asceticism, to the emphasis on the spirit, mind or soul as the truer and superior substance as against matter or the flesh. Other choices, however, were possible. Instead of asceticism, the body could be used freely if separated from the mind, that is, if its pleasures were made schizophrenic, also by being divorced from an emotional claim on the mind. This viewpoint was especially popular in Greece. It is reflected in Demosthenes' speech against Neaera, when he pointed out that, quote, "The haternae, prostitutes, are for our amusements, our slave women are for our daily personal service, and our wives are to bear us children and manage our household." End quote. The sexual relation had to be rationally controlled, and concupiscence could not be allowed to govern man. Plutarch's Lives gives us many examples of this perspective. Thus, in, quote, Lycurgus, end quote, we read that, quote, "Lycurgus allowed a man who was advanced in years and had a young wife to recommend some virtuous and approved young man that she might have a child by him, who might inherit the good qualities of the father and be a son to himself. On the other side, an honest man who had love for a married woman upon account of her modesty and the well-favouredness of her children might, without formality, beg her company of her husband, that he might raise, as it were, from this plot of good ground, worthy and well-allied children for himself." And indeed, Lycurgus was of the persuasion that children were not so much the property of their parents as of the whole commonwealth, and therefore would not have his citizens begot by the first-comers, but by the best men that could be found. The laws of other nations seemed to him very absurd and inconsistent, where people would be so solicitous for their dogs and horses as to exert interest and to pay money to procure fine breeding, and yet kept their wives shut up to be made mothers only by themselves, who might be foolish, infirm, or diseased, as if it were not apparent that children of a bad breed would prove their bad qualities first upon those who kept and were rearing them, and well-born children in a like manner their good qualities. These regulations, founded on natural and social grounds, were certainly so far from that scandalous liberty which was afterwards charged upon their women, that they knew not what adultery meant." End quote. This illustration from Greece is matched by one from Rome, in Plutarch's, quote, "Cato the Younger," end quote. Quote, "It is thus related by Theresia, who refers to the authority of Menesius, Cato's friend and constant companion. Among many that loved and admired Cato, some were more remarkable and conspicuous than others. One of these was Quintus Hortenius, a man of high repute and approved virtue, who desired not only to live in friendship and familiarity with Cato, but also to unite his whole house and family with him by some sort of alliance in marriage. Therefore, he set himself to persuade Cato that his daughter Porcia, who was already married to Bibulus, and had borne him 2 children, might nevertheless be given to him as a fair plot of land to bear fruit also for him. For, he said, though this in the opinion of men might seem strange, yet in nature it is honest and profitable for the public that a woman in the prime of her youth should not lie useless and lose the fruit of her womb, nor on the other side should burden and impoverish one man by bringing him too many children. Also, by this communication of families among worthy men, virtue would increase and be diffused through their posterity, and the commonwealth would be united and cemented by their alliances." End quote. Yet, if Bibulus would not part with his wife altogether, he would restore her as soon as she had brought him a child, whereby he might be united to both their families. Cato answered that he loved Hortensius very well, and much approved of uniting their houses, but he thought it strange to speak of marrying his daughter when she was already given to another. Then Hortensius, turning the discourse, did not hesitate to speak openly and ask for Cato's own wife, for she was young and fruitful, and he had already children enough. Neither can it be thought that Hortensius did this as imagining Cato did not care for Marcia, for it is said she was then with child. Cato, perceiving his earnest desire, did not deny his request, but said that Philippus, the father of Marcia, ought also to be consulted. Philippus, therefore, being sent for, came, and finding they were well agreed, gave his daughter Marcia to Hortensius in the presence of Cato, who himself also assisted at the marriage. End quote. Plato's Republic, in the plan for a communism of women by the philosopher kings, reflects a similar opinion. Other examples also can be cited. Heraclides of Pontus, a pupil of Plato, also held that luxury and sensual indulgences were the privileges of the ruling classes, who could govern all things with reason, whereas the poor and the slaves should be restricted to sweat and toil. The men of reason could indulge the flesh without being commanded by the flesh, it was held. Thus, Aristippus of Cyrene, when reproached for too continuous an affair with a Corinthian prostitute, said, quote, "I possess Lais, and am not possessed by her." End quote. On the other hand, some philosophers resolved the schizophrenic psychology in favour of the body, and hence concupiscence. Aristoxenus reflected this opinion. Quote, "Nature demands that we make lust the zenith of life. The greatest possible increase of sexual feeling should be every human being's goal. To suppress the claims of the flesh is neither reason nor happiness. To do so is to be proved ignorant of the demands of human nature." End quote. The Cynics in particular were intellectual champions of this position. In every case, the warfare of body and mind was assumed. This conflict was in essence a metaphysical, not an ethical or moral conflict. Man's problem was at bottom a problem of being. It was not his fault that he was made of 2 mutually exclusive substances in an unhappy union. In the biblical perspective, man's mind and body are simply 2 aspects of his created being. No more at war with each other than his 2 hands are at war with one another. It is absurd to say that man's right hand and left hand are at war with one another, by nature in contradiction, as it is to say that his mind and body are in natural contradiction. Man's war is with God, and its name is sin, his desire to be his own God and to determine good and evil in terms of his own fiat will, Genesis 3:5. Man suppresses the fact of this war against God because it means his moral guiltiness and his liability to punishment as a capital offender. Instead, he seeks to convert his moral failure into a metaphysical fact. I was made that way. This deadly psychology, transferred to and adopted by Christian theology, meant a severe blinding of moral vision and a crippling of moral strength. A glance at a church father, Clement of Alexandria, makes clear how the pagan psychology influenced the church. Clement, instead of seeing the radical cleavage between Moses and Plato, saw Plato as an imitator of Moses, but only by reading Moses with Plato in mind. He therefore held that, quote, law is the opinion which is good, and what is good is that which is true, and what is true is that which finds, quote, true being, end quote, and attains it. Quote, he who is, end quote, says Moses, quote, sent me, end quote, Exodus 3:13, in accordance with which, namely good opinion, some have called law, right reason, which enjoins what it is to be done and forbids what is not to be done, end quote. In such a perspective, reason is not depraved and willfully blind, it is rather the source of law and truth. The quotation from Moses asserts revelation, but it is out of place in this passage, which instead holds to the priority and ultimacy of reason. It is not too long a step from here, and it is a very logical one, to eliminate God and affirm reason as the de facto God of philosophy. Clement clearly held to the Platonic psychology, and his comments on passion show, quote, passion is an excessive appetite exceeding the measures of reason, or appetite unbridled and disobedient to the word. Passions, then, are a perturbation of the soul contrary to nature, in disobedience to reason. But revolt and distraction and disobedience are in our power, as obedience is in our power, wherefore voluntary actions are judged. But should one examine each one of the passions, he will find them irrational impulses, end quote. Clement then went on to make a distinction in terms of Greek psychology, which we have today in the courts in pleas of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. Quote, what is involuntary is not a matter for judgment, end quote. If mind and body are two alien substances, then the door is open to all kinds of claims that the passions of the body have acted against the mind, and moral responsibility is thereby denied. Voluntary actions, according to Clement, are by desire, by choice, and by intention. He distinguished between sins, mistakes, and crimes. Quote, it is sin, for example, to live luxuriously and licentiously, a misfortune to wound one's friend in ignorance, taking him for an enemy, and crime to violate graves or commit sacrilege. Sinning arises from being unable to do it, as doubtless one falls into a ditch either through not knowing or through inability to leap across through feebleness of body. But application to the training of ourselves and subjection to the commandments is in our own power, with which, if we will have nothing to do by destroying ourselves wholly to lust, we shall sin, nay, rather, wrong our own soul, end quote. Sin is thus reduced to ignorance and inability, whereas the Westminster Shorter Catechism rightly defines sin as, quote, any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God, end quote. Clement's remedy for sin is the exercise of reason. Moreover, for him, sin is especially wronging, quote, our own soul, end quote, rather than violating God's law. Quote, voluntary sin is crime, and crime is voluntary wickedness. Sin, then, is on my part voluntary, end quote. The result is a very confused and unbiblical psychology. By holding that the soul or mind is passionless and that affections and feelings are an imperfection, Clement faced a problem with the God of Scripture, to whom wrath and joy are ascribed, and who is even defined as quote-unquote love. For him, the deity was, by definition, quote, impassible, end quote, beyond passion and feeling. The Bible, therefore, is an accommodation to man's condition, quote, for the divine being cannot be declared as it exists, but as we who are fettered in the flesh were able to listen, so the prophets spake to us, the Lord savingly accommodating himself to the weaknesses of men, end quote. The body is the source of man's weakness, quote, for as the exhalations which arise from the earth and from marshes gather into mists and cloudy masses, so the vapours of fleshly lusts bring on the soul an evil condition, scattering about the idols of pleasure before the soul. Accordingly, they spread darkness over the light of intelligence, the spirit attracting the exhalations that arise from lust, and thickening the masses of the passions by persistency in pleasures. Gold is not taken from the earth in the lump, but is purified by smelting. Then, when made pure, is called gold, the earth being purified, end quote. Like the refining of gold, the soul must be purged and refined from the body. The true Gnostic is the Christian, Clement held, who becomes, quote, like his teacher in impassibility, end quote. Quote, we must therefore rescue the Gnostic and perfect man from all passion of the soul, for knowledge, gnosis, produces practice, and practice habit or disposition, and such a state as this produces impassibility, not moderation or passion, and the complete eradication of desire reaps as its fruit impassibility, end quote. The goal is an unfeeling man who is pure reason, a yogi and a commissar in one person, a man proficient in Greek philosophy as the necessary prerequisite to becoming a Christian Gnostic. Much later, this emphasis on impassible reason marks scholasticism. Lloyd has referred to, quote, the extremism of remorseless logic, end quote, which marked such thought. The scholars, on the one hand, became reason. The students, on the other hand, later moved to become pure flesh, denying the elusive other substance, soul. As a student song held, quote, down the broad way I go, young and unregretting, wrap me in my vices up, virtue all forgetting, greedier for all delights than heaven to enter in, since the soul in me is dead, better to save the skin. Modern man has not escaped the dilemma of Greek psychology. Some have chosen to, quote, solve, end quote, the problem by denying the body, as witness Christian Science, and others have denied the soul, as witness the behaviorists. These, quote unquote, solutions are metaphysical, not moral. They leave only a fragmented man, as in the last days of the Greco-Roman world. The same is true of those who seek in the drug experience a flight from the world of the senses into the supposed timelessness and oneness of the world of the soul. Much has been said in the 20th century about avoiding a dualistic psychology, a legitimate and necessary concern. However, because the presuppositions of modern man are rooted in Greek philosophy, their answer to dualism is not a new view of man, but rather his castration. To avoid dualism, a segment of reality is eliminated or downgraded. Mind becomes at best an epiphenomenon, and the distortion of psychology is aggravated. To deny the whole man is to pervert man and to warp him. A tragic example of false holiness leading to very serious sins was the Company of the Holy Sacrament, a secular organisation founded about 1620 by the Duke of Ventador. This young duke believed that holiness required him to live with his beautiful wife as a brother. The purpose of the company was to assist the Church's works of charity by supplying anonymous information about worthy causes or works to be done. It soon became a harsh, intolerant, persecuting force against casual Catholics and against Protestants. It was a dreaded secret society in many areas, and also, quote, the huge organising power which, at the end of the century, forced the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. The evils perpetrated by this company were mild when compared to the evils being practiced today in the name of passionless reason in the Marxist world and in Western countries. The dream of reason breeds monsters.